The next thing that I want to talk about is how do we relate to ourselves with kindness, and how do we relate to ourselves with severity? And, for those of us that took Kabbalah, you should probably have an understanding of, which side of the scale that you fall into for these two categories of how you relate to yourself. And, some of us are way too merciful with ourselves, and some of us are way too harsh with ourselves. And, really interestingly, how we relate to ourselves in regards to kindness and severity can be very different than how we relate to each other or to others. For me, it's definitely the opposite. And this can be very typical in our lives because we're really just trying to play out a balance of those two things somehow. And so this is how we do it. So I have some questions for you to think about for yourself and ask yourself around this. And the first question is, how do you talk to yourself? Are you very severe with yourself, or even quite mean and cruel to yourself? What does your inner voice sound like? Does it constantly scold you and tell you that you could do better or be better, or, you're not enough? Or does it never give you slack? Or are you too merciful with yourself and just let yourself off the hook all the time and not hold yourself accountable? Are you, how are your boundaries? Are you too loose with your boundaries with yourself and you don't push discipline or any sort of restriction on yourself? I think working with these questions honestly, but most importantly, with compassion, and really when you're answering these, viewing them to kind of trick yourself, because it can be hard, viewing it almost from a lens of what your best friend would say is critical. So you're not judging harshly. You're just looking at how you treat yourself, And, personally, I can say I have always been way too harsh on myself, and I still am, but I am working on it, and this has really led me to basically punish myself for things or feelings, that aren't even bad or wrong. And there's nothing wrong with them or nothing wrong with me in those regards. But, there are also areas that I'm definitely too loose with myself. And I work constantly to bring more balance in my life by working with these two concepts, tightening the reins where you need to, but also cutting myself slack in other areas. It's all about balance. And, the balance really changes as we change and grow. So this is an area that we need to look at often and come back to. These things are really the boundaries of our life. And I'll also say, in working with these things in myself, as my inner perception changes, my outer world and how I view people and situations has changed dramatically. And I have really been able to see that people aren't out to get me, no one's purposely trying to leave me out or abandon me or harm me. But those things are the lens that I not only saw my whole life through, but that's the lens I lived my life from. That's what I lived on the inside. And another like super key here in working with all of this is like perception really is reality. So as we work on our own stuff and we heal these things and we bring in more love for self, we're going to naturally have more love and see more love and more goodness in everything in the world. And that's really when the world becomes magical and opens up and is just a place of beauty, and that you can actually tap into that beauty when you get to that place. So once you have like evaluated or journaled about your own self-talk, and if you're really too severe with yourself, or if you're too merciful or kind with yourself, which I definitely like literally recommend you actually journaling these things yourself, then you can start to work with and think about how you relate to others. So the next question that I want to talk about is, how do we relate to others with kindness? Like, what does that look like, and when? And I already said this earlier, but like, I personally believe you can almost always relate to someone with kindness. And assuming positive intent in others goes a long way when you just take a step back and can look at the big picture. And again, approach things from that mindset of curiosity, It also will help you to approach things with kindness and compassion. So we also have to assume positive intent that everyone is really doing their best in life.